legal, but they haven't really gotten their act together to legalize the dispensaries. So they don't have a system yet to actually legalize the cultivation, manufacture, and sale of cannabis. So there's still what could be described as a gray market for cannabis products. And that's hugely significant for the organizations that are growing cannabis in Washington State, California, Oklahoma, and Maine, because in a gray market or a black market, you get a massive premium for your product. So if you grow marijuana here in the state of Maine and you take it to a dispensary to sell it, right now, that dispensary is probably getting somewhere around $7 a gram for your marijuana. They're going to pay you less than that, so because they need to make a profit as well. So it's probably like $4 or $5 a gram is what the grower is getting. It's barely enough to keep an operation going, pay your electricity bill, pay your labor, whatever. But if you take that same marijuana and you pack it in the back of a U-Haul truck, you have one of your illegal alien employees drive it to New York, you could probably get $20 a gram. So there's huge incentives to violate federal law and traffic this marijuana to jurisdictions where it's not legal at the state level.
That actually answers a big question for me, which is after New York State legalized cannabis, I noticed a bunch of these smoke shops suddenly like popping up around the city that were not dispensaries, but they were advertising as if they had cannabis products. And I was wondering what they were selling in these smoke shops.
Well, why didn't you go in to investigate, Shelley?
Well, I mean, because I don't really like smoke shops, and that part didn't occur to me. But that was interesting to me because I was thinking, like, what is the point of advertising like you have cannabis if you don't have cannabis?
Well, they did. They did have cannabis, I guess, is the short answer. And they might not have been a dispensary, but they've got, there's all kinds of ways where they can communicate to the end user that they do, in fact, have cannabis products. There's logos, there's stickers, there's a little bit of a subculture that communicates to the person who's walking by, oh, that's a place where that's going to sell me some cannabis. What you saw in New York is actually a trend that's mirrored nationally in states where we've been able to obtain the tobacco license registration figures. You can see that right around the time that hemp became federally legal, there's this explosion of people applying for tobacco licenses because the tobacco license is what you would need to open up the vape store and sell nicotine vapes, but also these any kind of hemp consumable products. That's what's really going to bring people through the door is the products that you can sell through a tobacco license. Now, that would run contrary to what we all see in our own lives is that, smoking rates have decreased drastically over the last 20 years. So why would tobacco licenses be, almost increasing exponentially? And the answer is because they've stumbled onto these new products, intoxicating hemp, synthetic drugs that mirror cannabis, and also 7-OH synthetic opioids. So there's a new class of drugs, including drugs that are really just illicit grown cannabis, like what the Chinese cartels are growing in Maine, that are making their way to these tobacco shops. That's where the end point of the whole process, the sale of the product occurs. And, I don't think that it's difficult to overstate how important it is that these products can be sold at a tobacco shop through a traditional financial rail. Because if you operate a cannabis dispensary here in Maine, you can't swipe your MasterCard or your Visa card for a bag of weed. Even if you're, a 25-year-old law-abiding adult walking into a dispensary, you can't, swipe your credit card through a Visa payment terminal or a Square payment terminal. Instead, you have to use a debit card or a debit-enabled credit card at an ATM, and the ATM has to take out the cash, and then you give the cash for the transaction because the federal illegality of cannabis makes it that the national payment processors and national banks don't want to touch any of the money related to cannabis. So this creates a number of problems for cannabis businesses. In Massachusetts, there's one of the first dispensaries that opened up actually opened up in an old bank building, in part because they wanted the security of vaults and concrete walls, because they knew that they were going to be doing several $1 million worth of business a day, and they were going to be sitting on that cash. So when you're sitting on a couple $1 million of cash at the end of the day, you want a little bit of extra protection for that. And we have seen a few cases of robberies in Maine of places that are sitting on large amounts of cash because of their involvement in the marijuana business. But it also makes it harder for you to bank. Marijuana businesses here in the state of Maine, they can't use Bank of America or TD Bank or Capital One checking accounts. They have to use state credit unions that don't do business outside of the state of Maine and have tailor-made products for these cannabis businesses. Now, those are all the problems and extra regulatory costs that you have if you are an ethical, law-abiding cannabis business owner who's following all the rules. However, if you're one of the illegal guys who's decided to move your product from Maine to New Hampshire and sell it at a smoke shop, well, you've got no problem getting insurance. You've got no problem using a bank. And that smoke shop can use Square. You can swipe your Visa credit card. It has access to all of the traditional payment systems. And the money pops out the other end nice and squeaky clean. So you've grown a bunch of cannabis in Maine and you've sold it. And you don't even have to worry about laundering the money, because it comes out the other side looking like it's just the proceeds of a tobacco sale. And there's going to be no questions from the IRS or from law enforcement about the amount of money you're selling, because it's all mixed in and cleaned alongside money for vapes and bongs and whatever other products the head shop or the tobacco shop is selling. So it's a huge, huge advantage that you have if you're willing to break the rules that we have in place.
Just before we move on from this, these THC products, like the hemp-derived products, there's no regulation over who's selling them. You don't have to get a license. You don't have to prove how much of a percentage of whatever is in it. Is that correct?
So there's slight regulation, but it's poorly enforced. So in order to qualify as a hemp product, you have to have less than 0.3% THC Delta 9. And you have to test that and you have to prove that. But there's a lot of controversy around when in a plant's life cycle you make that test. There's there's a lot of ways to get around that small test. And in some recent examples where states have done compliance checks on hemp products that are being sold, they found that anywhere from 50 to 80% of the products described as hemp are in fact just regular old cannabis. They have enough THC Delta 9 to be cannabis. And then in most states, of course, the age for buying a smokable or edible hemp intoxicating product mirrors whatever the age is for buying a tobacco product. So they typically are age gated. But then on the CBD side and some of the mail order side, that gets a lot harder to enforce. So there are some regulations, but they're poorly enforced. It's hard to enforce them. And there's a heated debate right now in Congress about changing those rules in order to make it harder for these intoxicating hemp substances to make it to the end consumer and undermine existing legal cannabis markets.
Who regulates those?
That's another fantastic question. It's done by agricultural departments in a lot of states. Sometimes it's done by law enforcement. Sometimes it's done by the federal government. Sometimes it's done by counties. It varies really from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And that's also been one of the real problems in combating the Chinese criminal networks generally, is no one really knows whose jurisdiction it is. And we've also reached a point where most of the cops are like our age and have, we've got the DARE generation of cops now who know that, cannabis isn't necessarily going to end your life and people shouldn't be in jail just because they were caught with a baggie of cannabis. And the legalization movement across the country has really deprioritized marijuana laws when it comes to enforcement. So now the big focus is fentanyl, cocaine, meth, bath salts, these new and emerging opioids, chemicals that are actually leading to high levels of addiction, homelessness, overdoses, that kind of thing. That's the signal we've sent to law enforcement. So they don't really care about marijuana products as much. So there's jurisdictional issues. No one knows whose responsibility it is. But there's also motivational issues where a lot of law enforcement are like, I mean, a cannabis bust, what the hell do I care? The guy's going to get a $150 fine or something, even if he is wildly flouting the law and he's part of a huge criminal network. So it's a very, very messy issue, and it's not super clear who enforces the regulations. But Congress does set through the Farm Bill the parameters that should be enforced by regulators.
Say no to drugs and say yes to more China Unscripted. You can watch and download the entire hour-long interview when you join my 50-cent army over at ChinaUncensored.tv. This is the best way to support the work we do and stand up to the CCP. Click below, and I've also put a link to Steve Robinson's investigative series, Triad Weed.